My name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. I am a compliance, ethics, and corporate governance strategist. My consulting firm is Lumen Worldwide Endeavors, and I'm one of the co-founders of MentorCore. MentorCore is a community for compliance, security, and risk professionals to grow and develop on their own terms. And we love having special guests in. We try to do these events every week on Wednesdays. And this week, we are delighted to have Jackie Cheslow joining us on a topic that a lot of people have been very, very interested in, which is how do you navigate to that second interview? So before we start, I am going to ask my counterpart and co-founder, Dan, to just briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan. I'm Dan Ayala. I'm the founder of Socratic, a security, privacy and security consultancy. But I think even more importantly, part of MentorCore. It's been almost a year now that we've had this together, and being able to bring events like this to people, to the community, especially around topics that are really very important. People right now are looking for jobs, trying to find jobs, trying to get interviews, trying to get through interviews. And our discussion today with Jackie is especially poignant as we come upon the 1 year anniversary of everyone's of this new lifestyle. Finding jobs changed, doing interviews, doing discussions changed, being a hiring manager changed. So I'm really excited to have this discussion with you, Jackie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So as Lisa and Dan said, I'm Jackie Cheslow. I am the Global Compliance Program Leader for an organization called IEEE, which is one of the largest professional associations for engineers. I have been a hiring manager for the last couple of decades, but I've sat on both sides of the table. And I'm glad to be here today, and I hope some of what we talk about you find of value.
Fantastic. And Jackie, we have had the opportunity to work together on compliance career connections. So Jackie is part of that leadership team that is helping to take us out of our kind of isolation and connect people in this time of truly bizarre time in history. We'll just leave it at that. But thank you for everything that you have been doing to give back to the community. I know that we have, as part of this volunteer grassroots effort, we have two events that are coming up at the end of this month to do mock interviews. And some of Jackie's feedback has been invaluable in setting up the framework for what we can talk about during those mock interviews. So let's start out. Jackie, what are some of the things that you have seen, like as a framework, in the interview process? Like, one of the things that we talked about before was having an interview is a little bit like a first date.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so you go out on that first date and you go home and you think everything went fantastic, and you
Right?
can't wait for the next date, and it never happens. Now, sometimes it's them, but sometimes it's us, and I think it's important when the similar thing happens with an interview, you don't get that call back, to reflect on how the interview went and think about areas where maybe you could have done a better job of presenting yourself, of engaging with the interviewer. So, really, and I've had quite a few of those first dates myself where you didn't get a call back. But eventually, you get that experience, and you begin to think about how you approach the situation very differently the first time around.
Yeah.
Killer resume only gets you in the door. It doesn't get you the job.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? A lot of times there is so much emphasis put on having the quote unquote perfect resume or the quote unquote perfect LinkedIn profile. And that can open up doors, right? You don't want to
Hmm.
be
That's it.
screened out at the very beginning before you get a shot.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get in there. You've got to get in the door. But once you're there, There's an old expression is you can only make a first impression one time.
Hmm.
And it's the truth. It takes about 5 seconds to make a bad impression, and you can't get that back. So your first interview is just that, whether it's by video or in person. How you present yourself is equally as important.
Right. So let's talk a
You
little
know,
bit about how you present yourself. What are the things that go into how you present yourself?
One is knowing who you're going to be interviewing with. So, not only knowing the organization, but do your research on the interviewer as well. I mean, with LinkedIn today, it's significantly easier than it ever was to get a feel for who you're going to be talking to. In my last round of interviews, when I had to speak to the general counsel, I realized that she worked with someone I had worked with 25 years ago when he was a first year associate. So I was able to bring that personal thing into the conversation and make a connection that way. So you need to know who the interviewer is as well. And you need to
What,
be prepared.
Jackie,
So
what about the idea that people get frightened about having it pop up that they were trolling or they were looking at
I was
interviews
thinking the
because
same thing,
you
Dan.
get that
yeah,
box and Dan Ayala has looked at your profile. Is that as a hiring manager, do you see that as a good thing or a bad
Or
thing?
creepy.
I think it's a good thing. That's why my LinkedIn profile's out there. I
Yeah, I
want
tend to
people to look
agree.
at it. If you tell me what's on my Facebook page, that's a whole nother story.
Yes.
We should talk
Yes.
about that, Jackie.
He's like, why do you have Facebook?
No,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I will say the same thing, right? So like a little bit goes a long way.
Right.
But then there's that creepy line. Like if you start telling me like what I had for breakfast that morning or something that seems a little bit personal that's not in my LinkedIn profile,
Right.
and then admit that you had a background check done on me, then it's not cool
Yeah,
anymore.
no, it's definitely not cool. And
timeline.
if you're taking fingerprints at a first date, it's not a good thing. So
Right, right.
I would say, but LinkedIn is there for that purpose. I mean, we all have a public profile out there for professional reasons. I want you to do your research because you may not want to work for me any more than I want to hire you. You want to know that before you show up, before you go into an
Yeah.
interview. And it also helps you do the diligence you need to do to be able to speak to these individuals. So, in my situation, I interviewed with the top commercial lawyer, the top privacy lawyer, the general counsel, and the admins. So it was a very unusual situation. That was 4 different conversations, and
Right.
I needed to prepare for them in 4 different ways. So that's very, very important. And I think um, one of the things that people need to think about too is uh, not just prepping on the individuals and the organization you're dealing with, but if you can, figuring out what the culture of an organization is. Is it a very white collar corporate, very official type of business, where everybody's got a suit and tie on, and in the old days women used to have to wear hose to work, they couldn't have bare legs, things like that.
Right.
Or is it a much more relaxed collegial group? If you're going into an organization where you're going to be one of 5 on a team or one of 50, that's 2 very different cultures. So knowing that ahead of time will help you project the type of personality they're looking for, the type of energy they're looking for, and really make you stand out above the crowd.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
What
So there's a question in the chat that I want to make sure we get to, which is on the same topic. Should you connect with a person before you interview with them?
I didn't, and I'll tell you why. If it doesn't go well, um, why are you out there? You want to connect with people that bring value to your professional network. And a bad interview is not going to help you with your professional network. So I would wait.
Right.
If the
right.
interview goes, really, really well and you think there's potential there, that's a whole different story. But I would really wait until after the fact, unless, and there's a big unless here, unless you know someone in your LinkedIn network that can make an introduction. Because often getting a job is more about who you know than what you know. So if you can get that connection going ahead of time,
Right.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And then
What
the
about
follow-up connect after the second interview, and if you
Right.
have a feeling.
After the second interview, you pretty much know what's going on. So if you're back for the second interview, you're probably one of the top three or four candidates. There's a good potential that they'd like you. They feel good about your professional skills. Still may not get the job, but definitely connect with them after that, because then at this point you've kind of established some kind of a relationship.
Yeah, and I know that
right?
a number of different companies have things that say, don't connect with interview candidates until you've made a determination about who's getting the job. So
Yeah.
look at your company policy too. And
Right.
Dan, I know you
Right.
had to say something before I jumped in.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was gonna say that when is the good point to do that? Sorry, you mentioned you generally know after you walk out of the interview that what the situation is. As we just came out of a security career connection discussion, that where people had been going 2 and 3 interviews in and then losing connection, losing, getting thinking it all went very well, but it didn't, or they got ghosted at that point. And we actually had a question in the chat as well, around, you think the feedback is very positive, but then you get ghosted from there on out. I- is any insights on, this is about the, not just about the LinkedIn connection, but in general, the interview process seems to be, the phrase that was used in the SEC meeting was devolving. We're interviewing process is devolving over time. Any
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
yeah, kind of. In some ways it is. Let's just talk about the LinkedIn connection. I would say it depends on how you connect as well.
We're having a hard time
Jackie, I
hearing you,
can't hear
Jackie.
you all that well.
No,
No, that's not better.
Very lightly.
it's
Oh,
very light.
it's working, but very.
Okay, let me see if I can turn this up somewhat. How, how's that?
Can
Is that better?
barely hear you.
What's going on here? That better?
Yeah, it is a little bit better.
Okay. We'll take these off and we'll use the outside speakers. I'll
Okay.
just hit mute really quick if the dog starts to bark.
Okay.
So I started to say the LinkedIn connection also depends on how you make the connection. Simply click on someone's name and say, I want to link with you. You're less likely to get anything back from them. I think you have to personalize it. So you've been in a second interview, it's gone really great, and afterwards you want to connect with this person. I would actually say in my request to connect with them, no matter how this turns out, I really enjoyed meeting with you, and I'd like to stay connected. Can we maintain a connection? And you might get better response that way. So that's one way of doing it. Sorry, Dan, with the audio, I forgot the second part of what you were asking.
So I think part of it was, how do you make sure that afterwards you, can connect with people? Some people, don't want to connect with people. And then the other part was, um, if they're really ghosting you as a candidate, can we assume it's a them rather than us situation? Or, what should you do at that point if, you felt like everything was going great and they even told you things were going great?
Yeah, ghosting candidates is a discussion I've had with HR groups in many organizations. Because there's nothing worse than interview after interview and never hearing anything from the organization. If they're ghosting you, there's a reason they're ghosting you.
Well, it really does speak to kind of the HR within the
Yeah,
organization too.
it does kind of speak to the
Right.
organization. I was in a position one time where I had a candidate that I was ready to hire. I mean, I wanted this woman on my staff, and we were preparing an offer when top came down from the top. That's it. We've got a hiring freeze. And they didn't want to go back to the candidate and tell her this. They wanted to keep her kind of, string her along
Keep her
so she'd
warm.
be available when the freeze lifted. And I was like, we can't do that to people. That's just not right. Because in this situation, where either you're not getting called back or you're not hearing from the employer, it's a two-sided relationship, like anything else. And it's as much on the hiring managers as it is on the candidates to deal with the process right.
Yeah,
And
and it
to
gives you
treat
some
each other with
indication.
right. You got to treat each other with respect. You really have to be conscious that these are people's lives. that are being dealt with, and you can't walk away and ghost them. That's just not the way to handle it.
Yeah, it's
Right.
I keep hearing that it's happening more and more and more and more, which is disheartening anytime. But then you layer on the fact that people are increasingly out of work, looking for jobs. We're now a long ways into this pandemic and changing work models, and it's having significant impact on people. So my request to hiring managers is remember this when you're dealing with this, and talk to your HR organization and make sure that they're treating candidates humanely.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And the virtual world makes it so much more difficult, right? You don't really get that. It's hard to make a personal connection over video. And I work really hard at it because I was at my organization 6 weeks when we shut down, and trying to get a compliance program off the ground without having those personal relationships is impossible. So I work really, really hard at building relationships virtually, but it's not easy, and you can't do it in like a 30-minute interview. So we're isolated, both the candidates and the hiring managers. So treating people properly is perhaps more important than anything else.
Yeah. So one of the things I keep hearing is just, you know, HR teams are under a lot of stress right now. They've gone, from hiring freezes to, you've got to hire quickly to everything in between. And so there doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason or sometimes attention to detail around candidates. And so, like, understanding that about different organizations, a lot of companies have gone through hiring freezes or layoffs, and now they don't have the staff to even, have that almost employee prospective employee service levels that uh, that that you would expect.
But
And
let's be honest. Some
yeah.
of this was already in place well before. Some of these
Oh,
trends and mentalities were already well in place.
yes, yes.
Let's You can only blame
Three,
so many
four
things on
employees
COVID.
ago, yeah, 3, 4 employees ago, they changed the name of human resources to people, processes, and culture. And I said, there it goes. They finally took the human out of it entirely.
Right,
When I
right,
think of people processing, it's just sausage.
right.
Yeah, pretty
Um,
much.
and we got another question in the chat. And this was somebody who, went through an interview process, went through multiple interviews, and then was ghosted, right? So just bupkis in terms of feedback. But then this particular person had a request to provide the organization with feedback on the process. And what are some of the tips for asking for feedback from the organization as an interviewee? Um, I know that this is part of the reason that we're doing the mock interviews for
Right,
the compliance career connections is because 9 times out of 10 organizations have a no feedback policy.
I was just going to say, with absolutely no offense meant to any attorneys on the phone,
We're
um,
terrible.
but business departments have basically shut it down. So you're not allowed to give any kind of feedback because they don't want to run the risk of any liability, making it incredibly difficult to get any kind of feedback. If you're lucky, when you send your thank you notes, which today is very easy to do, you can send them right by email. Send them as soon as you can after the interview. And if you're lucky, you'll get some feedback from the people you spoke to, not realizing they're giving you feedback, things went well or something like that. But from a formal feedback from an organization perspective, there's very little chance of that happening in today's environment. It's just really been shut down. Um, I think more importantly is a measure of what goes on during the interview itself.
Yeah, I think that really helpful advice. And I would also encourage people. So I have always been a big advocate for trying your interview style out with multiple volunteers to try to get some honest feedback ahead of time on how you're coming off. Because what
Yep.
you don't want is to feel like you're landing it every time and someone's like, oh, yeah, that was not a good way to talk about this. You sounded like really off the mark, or, you were arrogant, whatever it is. Like, you don't want to feel like you're going in all confident and actually you just come off as being a jerk.
Right, right. Never try to be the smartest person in the room when you're interviewing. I mean, That it really is the biggest thing I can say to you. You don't have to be. And one of the tips I always give people, because like Lisa mentioned earlier, I'm trying as much as possible to help people connect and help people get jobs through this. Also part of Mentor because I like to be mentored as much as I like to be a mentor. Um, is trying to get the right expression I'm looking for here. When you walk into an interview, the interviewee doesn't want a recitation of what's on your resume. I, I mean, if you're there, it's because you've got the resume and they think you can do it. What they really want to hear from you is what you're going to bring to the team, what value you bring to the position you're interviewing for, and why do you stand out above everybody else I've seen. So
Yeah.
rather than talking about what you've done in the past, you really want to talk about how you think you bring value, what you can add to what they have, how you can enhance what's there already. So it's not your usual elevators pitch, right? So this is more about engaging them and finding out where the pain points are. And it's a question I ask often when I'm interviewing, and even when my day-to-day job, when I'm first getting to know people, is asking them where their pain points are, and then trying to figure out how I can put myself in a position to address those pain points, right? So during an interview, if you can elicit that kind of information from the hiring managers, then you've got the perfect opening for your sales pitch on where you're the right person to come in and help address those issues. Now, I would not go so far as to say you can come in and solve those issues, because you come off as a bit overconfident. But by all means, use your background and your expertise to try and propose how you could help solve that problem, right? And
Yeah.
some of us are interviewing positions that we don't exactly have a perfect fit for. Like when I took this position, their number one risk is sanctions and export controls. I
Right.
didn't know anything about it. And I was very upfront about that during the interview, but I was able to tell them how other experience I had would enable me to step into that position and pick up the ball and run with it so that I was able to help them quickly with that pain point.
That's great. And I know, part of the advice was, you don't need to recite everything that you've ever done. But I have seen some managers, not necessarily the hiring manager, but other people involved in the interview process who have never read your resume. They're totally unprepared sometimes.
So tell me
Um,
about yourself.
right.
And
So,
and that goes to the hiring manager then. What you should be as prepared as your candidates are.
um,
The resume should be on the screen as you're talking to the candidate because you haven't read it.
right,
Yeah.
right. I know that we have a couple of questions in the chat. One of them is, should we reach out first to the HR person that we've interviewed with, or go directly to managers that you've talked to on the phone for the second interview? Any best practices here or approach to parties? Do you send the same email message to thank them? Because now it's definitely emails, not
Mhm.
actual, thank you cards. Because if you're sending that to someone's home, it's super creepy.
Yes.
Um, so what would you say your advice is there, Jackie?
Well, thank yous are critical. I mean, and no more so than today because it's so easy to send them. I was in a group a hiring round just recently, as a matter of fact, and we had two equally qualified candidates. Either one of them could have been hired on the spot, and one sent thank you notes and one didn't. Guess which one got the job?
It really does
Um,
make the difference.
and I would make sure that you customize your thank you notes to the people you're sending it to. Don't send out the same template text to everybody you interviewed with because they compare notes.
Mm-hmm.
Like the my parents in the bar mitzvah thank you notes. Thank you for
Yes.
your very generous present. I was not allowed to do that. It paid
Yeah,
off in the end, but yeah.
right. Well,
You have to personalize it a little bit so that,
Yeah.
you know,
yeah. I will say, at some companies, they don't have people who are in the interview process giving out their emails, and those emails may be very, sensitive or ones where they don't want to receive information. And what I've seen done with that is, there's usually an HR
Yeah.
interface. And a lot
Right.
of times people will say, I met with this person. Can you please convey the following to this person? Or I
Yeah.
met with this person, and they go through that HR conduit.
Yep,
Yeah, I've done that.
exactly.
I've done that
Exactly.
with 5
Yeah,
Word
and it's
documents saying,
easy
"Please
enough to
distribute."
get them these days.
Right.
My place is very open when they schedule an interview in these circumstances. Of course, it wasn't as easy when I interviewed in person, but virtually, you're getting a meeting invite on Google Meet or on WebEx or Zoom or whatever it is, and everybody's email addresses are there. So it makes it easy. But if you can't, then HR is definitely the way to go because they make them the first outreach. And if it's not HR and you're working with a recruiter or a headhunter, do it through them.
Right.
Do it through them.
Right. Dan, I know you have a question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested. We talk a lot about getting people practice interviewing, especially when you've been in a role for a long time, you haven't been out there and haven't done interviews, or it's not natural to talk to for you to talk to other people or to have these things ready to go. So we talk about practicing, but I'm curious on your thoughts, one about that versus the, especially when it's for a job you don't necessarily want. Hey, I'm just going to take this, I'm going to apply for this and get practice interviewing. From the hiring manager side, can you pick up on that? Does that change the way way you interview them? Does it affect, how can that have, positive and negative implications for somebody going into that?
That shows. And it very definitely shows. If you're interviewing just for the sake of interviewing, you haven't done any of that prep work we talked about early, and you're
Hmm.
not really too concerned about the way you're presenting yourself. And Elizabeth knows this story, but I interviewed a candidate not too long ago. And when she was on with me, it wasn't terrible. But then I heard from the GC afterwards that she was laying on her couch with the computer on her chest during the interview, and you could see the computer rising and falling as she was interviewing. She clearly didn't really want the job, and was there for the practice. So it's not always that obvious. That's an extreme example, but it's just some of the things that we've seen in the past year. I'm very fortunate. I work for an organization. We've been hiring throughout. We learned how to remotely onboard people, and we were able to keep hiring. So we were extremely fortunate. But that just means I got a lot more experience with this virtual interviewing, and I think
Right.
I think virtual interviews are here to stay. I don't think even when we're back to business as usual, that we're going to all be back to in-person interviews. One thing this allows us, particularly with the ability to work remotely, we can hire the best talent from anywhere. You don't need to live nearby. So it's important that we all get very skilled at this, both the hiring managers and the interviewees. This is definitely the way things are going to happen going forward. I've even heard, and as scary as it is, about chat bots doing interviews
Yeah.
and then recording it. And I can't think of anything more horrifying because you don't even get to talk
Well,
to a person.
Well,
yeah,
I
the
know people who have
one
had
way.
those one-way interviews,
Oh,
actually quite a few.
Yeah. And not even just chatbots. There's actually new technology that people are deploying to look at facial implications, not recognition, but looking at all the detection. Is this truthful? Is it not? Are they
oh,
excited about it? These moving, changing analyses of your presentation to talk about to convey the emotion and the honesty of what it is you're doing.
Because there's no bias in that ever.
There's a whole there's a whole ethics discussion that goes along with that, but they've been using these one-way interviews for a long time in sales, high turnover jobs, high applicant loads, to do initial filtering, and everyone I know that's gone through it has had less than positive feedback about it. And it says something about the company too, that they're going straight into automated, some of those automated means, but we all love efficiency in this
it,
country.
it
So
tells you a bit about the culture you're going into.
yeah, exactly.
So we've got
Yeah.
a series of questions here. We
Okay.
have a lively chat today. So when you were interviewing and you didn't have a lot of experience in sanctions and embargoes, did you make a commitment at the interview that you were going to upskill in that area? And would you recommend to do that if there's a gap that's really prioritized for a job?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I had a little bit of insight before I went in from HR about, the different requirements of the job. And it was line number one in the skill set, right? So I had done some research ahead of time to say what I was going to do, which was very helpful. And it wasn't specific, it was more like I've identified, ABC webinars, and I'm going to jump on those as soon as I can. And what training is available to me through the organization was a big question to ask, because within 2 or 3 days of my being on board, I was on with outside counsel taking an in-depth training. They set it up for me ahead of time. So that, I think, was really key. And you could do that with pretty much anything. And I would say this year's been incredibly helpful for people trying to learn new skills. There aren't enough hours in a year for me to attend all the free training that's out there. So if there's a gap in your resume that you know it's there, jump on some of this free training now, because then at least you can talk intelligently about it, even though you don't have the actual practice. So they'll know that you're trying to learn it, you're trying to get it. Definitely puts you above the other candidates.
And then a follow-up question about calling HR or sending a thank you to HR. Is that necessary? If you just have an HR screening call, do you have to send a thank you to the HR person who did the screening before you even get invited for an interview? Like in some countries, it would be considered a little odd, but the US is a little odd in a lot of ways.
Well, that's it. I love when Americans say, in this country it'd be odd, and I think you have no idea how odd we are. The HR screening call gets you into that first interview with the hiring manager, and if it goes well, by all means. I mean, there's no harm in doing it. I definitely think it just positions you well when you go in, right? So I had done that, and I was going into a hiring manager position though, and I knew that, and I knew I'd have to work with these people afterwards. Depends on the role you're into. No harm in doing it. If it's odd in the country you happen to be in, don't do it. But otherwise, I would say, sure, why not?
Plus,
Yeah.
the reality is that person, if it goes well, that person is going to be your primary contact for a while, and you're going to want them. You're going to need and want their help to get all the way through the process. So
Well, that's it.
it
And if
doesn't
you and I are negotiating salary, guess who's taking it to come for approval?
exactly. He was
The hiring
snarky when he
manager.
said it, and yeah, it's you. That's your advocate, whether you like it or not. That person's going to be your advocate for a while.
So one of the things that we had talked about earlier is, as we're prepping in this brand new world that we all live in, what are some things that we can do? Because I was listening to a conversation actually right before this, where we were talking about 1% being 1% better than the other candidates. Like your 1% in the example you gave us before was taking the time to write a thank you letter. What are the 1%ers that we need to think about? Like distractions? Like how many times do you get phone calls during the interview? Like what does your background look like? What are some things that you think make a difference?
If you're getting on an interview, your phones should be off. Your other computer screens should be off. You shouldn't be checking emails and video running on the side. In as much as possible, and it's very hard and work from home, close the door on your children and pets. I know it's difficult, and somebody's going to hear them in the background, and they will certainly understand. Well, for the most part, they will. It was that one organization that didn't. For the most part, they'll understand, but you have to make every effort. Make sure the space you're interviewing in front of is professional looking. You don't want to do it in the kitchen where the dishes are behind you on the counter. It's okay to do it in the kitchen, but you don't want to see that. So I
Not
would
the
say
dirty
all of
dishes,
that
but the
comes
clean
into
stacked
play.
ones.
Yeah.
Right.
all of that comes into play. I get tired of sitting in, I have a very small office. I get tired of sitting in here. I go down and find other spots in the house, but always thinking about what's behind me. So that's key. It really is.
And I know one of the things we talked about is like, control the controllables, right?
Yeah.
Don't set your dishwasher to go off and buzz or have the potential of buzzing in the middle of your interview. You might want to talk to the other residents in the house to say like, can we not do the vacuum cleaner right now? Or, um, you know, um, eh, keeping those kind of under control to the best of your abilities really does make a difference.
You have a motion detector on your Ring doorbell that chimes every time a car drives past your house. I mean, you know, there are a lot of things we can control.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So I know that there was actually a pretty lively chat going on about um, practicing interviews. Like, do you take the interview if you think you might only be 20% interested in the job just to continue to get practice? And how do you feel as the candidate if you know that they're really only considering the internal person, but they've now just taken up an hour of your time or more to interview you as they quote unquote kick the tires?
Yeah, if they're kicking the tires, do you want to work for them?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we all need a paycheck, but if they're willing to waste your time, I'm not sure I want to work for them. I will tell you, I don't interview any candidate who doesn't have a real possibility of getting the job. I can't spare the hours in my day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
so there are parts of me that are a little torn on this because I have gone on interviews where I was like, yeah, it might be an okay job. And then I get to the interview and I'm like, this is an awesome job. What was I thinking? So I think it's really a sliding scale. Like I will say, when I ended up going to Carlson Wagonly Travel, I loved my job at Best Buy. I relished those relationships, but I got a call from a headhunter and I was like, I don't want to talk to you. And eventually, he did convince me to talk to him. And after listening a little bit, I'm like, well, actually, this might be a really interesting position. And then doing interviews, I became more and more interested. But if you're completely disinterested, I don't think you should waste people's time.
yeah, and you interview for jobs that you're really interested in, even if you don't think you're qualified, because that's a way to get practice, right? You
Yeah.
never know. You might just get your foot in the door, but it will help you figure out what you need to do to get qualified. So there, I would say absolutely. And I was very much, Lisa, in the same position as you with this job. I was in my position for 12 years. I had a solid, robust compliance program in place, and I was finally starting to rest a little bit. And I got a call from a headhunter, and I was like, well, I'm not really looking, and I'm kind of happy here. And they started to tell me about the job and the organization, and I started to do my research, and I thought, maybe I should go talk to these folks. And one of the best moves I ever made. So you
Right.
never really know. But I would say, if you don't think you have sufficient experience for the job, but you'd really be interested in it and you think you can do it, go interview for it. You never know.
So the
Yeah.
interest is the draw. Interest is the variable that needs to be there, not necessarily the experience. Or sorry, not necessarily the experience. Versus, I don't have interest, but I'm interviewing because just to interview is
Right.
not okay.
I don't think you get in practice then at interviewing for a job you really want if it's not a job you're really
Yeah.
interested in,
Yep.
Yeah.
because they're going to ask you, all of the hiring managers in a particular industry are going to be asking you about the same types of things. So depending on what the job is, right? So if you're in security, they're going to be asking you about the types of technologies you work for, the types of data you handled, the types of organizations you've been in. If you're in compliance, they're going to ask you about the risk areas you've worked in, at what level of the programs, or do you have experience with training? There's a lot of um, consistency in what you're going to get asked. So get the right practice. If you're going to interview for practice, make it worth your while.
So
Right.
you mentioned
You might
earlier.
just get
Mm.
lucky.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
Every once in a while, you get that dream job and you're like, whoo, how did this happen?
Now what do I do?
Well,
I don't know how to do this.
or the other thing is, I love the company and I love the product, and the passion for helping the company can overcome the fact that you may not have the skills, um or that the you can help morph the role into something that is that is more in line with what you want. I've had that case where I applied with a company and it was because I loved the product that they did. I was a user. I wanted to help make it better. I didn't necessarily know what they were planning on doing with the role, but it was a great way in the door. And then that passion took us a bit way through. It didn't end up materializing, but it was, being wanting to be part of the organization is, I think, equally as valuable as wanting the job.
Yep. That's it,
Um, so
And as I said, I wasn't particularly interested in changing positions, but the organization I work for is a 501c. It's a nonprofit. And the mission of the organization is the development of technology to improve the world for mankind. Who could pass that up?
Oh, that
I
old chestnut. Ah, yeah, no,
Who
of
could
course, that's
pass that up?
wonderful.
Yeah,
It's
so I thought, well, here I can do something I love at an organization that I believe in, and I had no problem with my prior organization, but it was a publicly traded company that dealt in commodities and you could get anywhere. And this was, who could pass that up?
Right.
I,
yeah.
I support their mission.
Right. Sometimes you just end up with something that seems to be right. And those, serendipitous moments come along during a career at different points in time. Sometimes it's just the right move at the right time.
Yeah.
Um, so we got a question in the chat, which I think is really interesting. So, given the world we are in right now, if a job is remote now, but likely to require a move to a to be in office extensively, or even a move to a new location, how much should you lock yourself in if you're not really sure that you want to relocate? I know they oftentimes ask if you're willing. Um, there's some sense in the media that most companies will shift to permanent remote and compliance type jobs to a large extent. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're going to see some remote. I don't think it's going to be as extensive as a lot of people think. The tech companies, maybe. But I work for an organization that's been around since the 1850s. They're in no hurry to switch to working from remote. Um,
No.
I think it's the difference between you looking at this as a job or a career move.
Right.
If it's a job and you don't think you're going to want to relocate down the road and it's a possibility, well, then you just move on to the next job. But if it's a career move, go in with your eyes open. They're making a commitment to you and you're making a commitment to them. And if you're not willing to consider it and it comes up, then maybe you shouldn't be there. I think it's the difference between, as I say, whether you're taking a job or you're making a career move.
Right. So I have another question for you. I have seen people who prepare for interviews by trying to come up with the right answer rather than what they really think, because they're so worried about the company choosing them
Mhm.
and not as worried about them choosing the company, and what that, like, those answers actually mean when they play out once they have the role. Do you have any perspectives on that? Not that it's a leading question or anything.
Yeah.
And
No.
not that you'll have to continue to be that person for the next 5 years in the career.
Well, that Dan is a big part of it. If you're telling someone you can do something and you can't do it, and then you get in there, there's no there's no downside to saying during an interview, I don't know. Or I'm aware of what you're talking about. I'd have to learn more about it.
Mhm.
I'm looking to give the right. How do you know it's the right answer? You're not the hiring manager. Um, so I think it's important to go into an interview and be your best self, whatever that is, whatever it looks like. And I think that really serves you better than trying to um, show up in an interview ready to play a role. I think just go in and be your absolute best self, and that's the best way to get where you need to be.
I want to jump on that I don't know comment for a second, only because
Mhm.
that's been a way, both as a hiring manager and as a candidate. Um, I love hearing that somebody says they don't know,
Mhm.
because I want somebody who understands their own limitations. And then even better, I've been able to take and parlay those into part of the thank you note is a little research on the thing that I said I didn't know about. Then that
Okay,
goes into
that's a
the
nice
interview,
tip.
or it goes into the thank you note. Hey, I had a chance to look up this, and it enlightened me because I learned this. Thanks for helping me paint it. It really does show people who are learners and have that hunger to grow themselves.
Right. There was a blog post on LinkedIn this week by Christy Grant Hart, and it talked about the top 5 traits for the best compliance officers. And one of them was being a voracious learner. And I think it's okay to say, I don't know, but I will learn. I think that's really, really important. And I also think it's important to convey yourself as someone who Yes, I've got a lot of experience and I am a seasoned professional and I can do this job, but I'm smart enough to know when I don't know and I don't hesitate to ask questions.
Right.
I when I hear that, I think that's probably one of the best characteristics to someone coming in, you
Yeah,
know?
I
It,
think I mean, I don't know that that's contained to just compliance, right? Being a
not at
voracious
all.
learner is really important in
That's
every profession, particularly now. Like, we know that some of the professions that we have right now will be obsolete
Mhm.
in 10 years, and that there is going to be a need for consistent upskilling, retraining along the way. That's just part of the deal. Some of the stuff that's coming up is so novel, no one has experience,
you don't
right?
have 25 years of Amazon Web Services experience securing it?
Nope.
Come on.
Nope. Do I have 25 years of experience in crypto? Nope. No, nobody else does either. So I mean, I think we just need to realize and have that little sense of humility to say, I may not know this, but I can learn it. I've learned lots of other things in the past, and here's how I've learned along the way, because I don't like sitting still and not learning.
Right. The question earlier about did I make commitments during the interview process about what I didn't know? Not only did I make the commitments, but when I did my self appraisal at year end, I could truthfully report that I had taken over 100 training hours on the topic. Now, that was nights and weekends because I had a lot to learn very quickly, and you probably won't be doing that. I was put in a position where I had no choice to, but I was, able to demonstrate then that not only had I said I would do it, I had done it.
So you were a person of your word, and they
Right,
could see that from even before you joined the organization.
right,
Right.
right. And
I think that's really powerful.
So before we get to what'll be, we're coming up. This hour's gone so fast. We're nearing the end of our time. But before we get to what is our weekly signature question, one of the things that came up in the chat, I do want to bring up, and it's around using personal networks. Mentor Core is here to help people build personal networks. We all know many people, and I don't know about you, but I at times feel like I feel badly about keeping going to the well and saying, "Hey, can you introduce me to this person?" Or, "Hey, what do you know about this organization?" Or what can you help me get there? Um, this is less about getting the interview and just more about your own personal thoughts on, and both of you actually, on how to balance out the need for that kind of assistance with feeling or being perceived as bothersome.
Hmm.
I think you have to curate your network. First of all, I don't accept every request I get to connect with people, and I'm judicious about who I connect with. That's not to say I don't have over 1,200 people in my connections, but it's a network where we can give and take. So, and I never ask for anything without ending the conversation with, and please don't ever hesitate to ask me if I can return the favor, even if you just want a restaurant recommendation, anything you need, right? So,
Yeah,
it's two way. So I don't feel guilty about asking if I'm always willing to give.
I love that. So, my 2 cents on this is people know when you're authentic and you are cultivating a relationship of caring and mutuality as opposed to transactional in nature. And I think that if you are a person who is asking someone to do something that you would not do yourself, then you're barking up the wrong tree. I really think that you need to treat your relationships as kind of almost like a sacred space. Like, be pure and authentic with them, or it shows. And it's an ugly look on anyone to be self-serving and either manipulative or one completely one way. It just
Mhm.
That's not the recipe for a lasting, healthy set of relationships. What do you think, Dan?
I totally agree, and I tend to I tend to do the same. I give freely without the expectation of receiving back. But when I do, it's nice, it's nice. I tend to ask way less than I perhaps should. But I always want to be the one people come to. It's
That's
just my
the only time
nature.
I ever feel guilty is if I find a request sitting in my LinkedIn mailbox or something I didn't see, and they've been sitting out there waiting. Then I feel horrible. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, these people are so good to me. I should have seen this.
You almost need a separate queue away from the sales things in the in the
Well, that's
LinkedIn
it.
for,
Even
legitimate
salespeople I respond
requests.
to, though. I respond to the salespeople, and I don't always accept their request, but I'll respond back to them. Sorry, it's not something I would be interested in, but thanks for reaching out. Something.
Hmm.
It's effort, but it's worth it because
Right.
my network has been invaluable over the years. Absolutely invaluable.
Oh, me too.
Um, so it's worth developing it. It's worth nourishing it. I always refer, like a garden. You gotta water and feed it so it
Yes.
continues to grow, right?
And I want to jump back to something before that last question. It was something I was thinking about, but had lost when we moved on to this next topic. Um, but it came back was, when you're in the organization, talking about experience and some of the culture of the organization and learn people who can learn and are hungry for learning versus the alternative. Some organizations want everybody to be ready now. They want you to walk in, you're ready now. They don't necessarily expect growth in you. They just want to know what you are today. And some really do value, this is the training versus liberal arts. I have actual skills, or I have more liberal arts type learning how to learn skill sets. Any thoughts on how to probe that question during the interview process to get an understanding of how that company feels, what the culture is, because it may not be compatible with your mindset. I am a learner. I'm going to want to learn and grow, but some people are more, this is what I do. I love this. I want to continue to do this, and I know that I'm ready to come into that, and that's what the organization expects. Any
Mhm.
thoughts on how to pursue that question during the interview, without either offending or getting booted out of the process just for having asked?
It may not be an opportunity that presents itself in every interview, but if you get the opportunity to ask the interviewee, the hiring manager, um, how long they've been with the organization, and is this where you started, or did have you moved through the organization? It's a roundabout way, kind of coming in from the side to say, is there growth in this organization? Is there opportunities available? Just by asking about them. And
Right.
as I say, it doesn't always present itself, but you get that opportunity more often than not, I think.
Hmm.
And find out, because if someone's been sitting in the same role for 35 years, and they're not sitting in the C-suite, you got to say why. Or, is there no place to go in this organization? Is there no opportunity to grow and expand and enhance my skill set? So I think just learning about the people that are interviewing you can help you kind of ferret that out.
So we got a great question in the chat, and I think it's probably the last question that we'll have before Dan asks our
Darn the
signature
luck.
question. I know. So as we connect with more and more people, is it understood that we should just be updating people regularly about our job search? There's a balance between, fear of neglecting them versus fear of annoying them involuntarily. Like, how do you balance that? Because I know people who, there are a lot of people who have been out of work for extended periods of time, sometimes a year, 2 years or more. Where's the balance there? And how do you avoid having it feel like, well, still out of work? Can you do anything for me?
Well, you have that great frame now on LinkedIn, right? Open to
Open to
work.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that kind of lets people know you're still looking. But as far as your network's concerned, if someone's done something for you, if someone's done a favor, got your resume in someplace, or got you an interview or an introduction, give them an update on the status of it. You don't have to keep everybody in your network updated. You do want to go back to them and say, I just want to thank you again. Here's how it turned out. And then you're done. But I will say that frame on LinkedIn, I think, is one of the best ideas ever, because you actually can look and see who's out there looking for work, who's
Hmm.
hiring. I mean,
Mhm.
when I have open positions, I put up, I'm hiring around my head.
Right.
Um, so you can really find out that way. But no, you don't need to update your entire network to your status on a regular basis. just be sure to go back and update the people who've done specific things for you. First of all, they'll know you're grateful and they'll appreciate the update.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dan,
Great.
we
Yeah.
are
So we're
winding up
there.
here.
We're running out of time. And Jackie, this has been amazing. I can't tell you the great insights and that you've shared have been so appreciated by us and everybody here. But we always end our Mentor Core events with a question. And the question is, what is the best thing you've learned from a mentor?
Uh, have to say, and this will sound odd if you don't know what I'm talking about, but I listened to the Great Women in Compliance podcast.
Our friends Mary Shirley and
Religiously.
Lisa Fine.
Yeah, religiously, and way back in the beginning, I guess it was like in the first 20 episodes, I was listening to it, and I used to refer to Mary and Shirley, and I used to refer to as my mentor in the car. And the guest that day said I needed to overcome my feeling about being the only woman in the room. She said her husband said to her, the only person who's thinking you're the only woman in the room is you. And you need to go get past that. And that is the best thing I ever learned. Because till now, I've worked in predominantly male dominated industries. I was in car rental for over a decade. And it was hard being the only woman in the room till I stopped thinking of myself that way and started thinking of myself as the compliance person in the room.
Right.
So while not a face-to-face mentor, that my mentor in the car, that voice coming out of the speaker system gave me the clue that I needed to get over that. And that's the best thing I've ever learned.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Well, and unfortunately, we're out of time. We had a great day with you, Jackie, and the questions just kept on coming in. I'm sure that there are people who want to follow up and everything like that. We appreciate having you here with Mentor Core today on
Well,
this
I'm
really
on, I'm
important
on
topic.
LinkedIn and I'm happy to connect. I'm happy to answer questions out there. Dan, is it possible to save the chat? Maybe I could do a post and respond to some of the
Yes,
questions.
I have the chat and I will send it to you and you can address it as you would like to. And we can
So,
put
Yeah,
we
I'll
can
put
include the
together. I mean, I'll
results.
put together a short blog so there'll be some answers out there to the other
Yeah.
questions.
And we can include a link to it in the post. This will be available on replay on mentorcore.biz within the next few days. We can put a link to that blog post result in along with the embedded video.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
yes, and I want to thank everybody for attending. We have two really great Mentor Core events coming up within the next week. We have on Friday a session on SCARF and loving your brain, understanding some of the triggers and how to better communicate. And then next week, we have Samantha Kellen, who's going to be talking about why she believes in you and you should too. So thanks for joining us and have a wonderful day.